The border between Thailand and Cambodia stretches for hundreds of kilometers, cutting through dense jungles, farmlands, and rocky highlands. On a map, much of this boundary has been officially demarcated, but the reality on the ground is far more complicated. For decades, sections of the frontier have remained disputed, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the area surrounding the ancient Preah Vihear temple. This temple is not just an archaeological treasure, it is a powerful national symbol for both countries, a reminder of the glories of the past, and a rallying point for national pride in the present. Preah Vihear sits on a steep cliff in the Dangrek Mountains, commanding sweeping views of the Cambodian plains below. Built during the height of the Khmer Empire in the 11th century, it was dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva and later became a site of Buddhist worship. For Cambodians, it represents one of the crowning achievements of their ancestors, a visible link to the power and sophistication of the Khmer civilization. For Thais, it is part of a shared cultural heritage that reflects centuries of migration, trade, and interwoven history between the two peoples. The roots of the modern dispute trace back to the early 20th century, when colonial powers redrew maps of Southeast Asia. In 1904 and again in 1907, agreements between France, which controlled Cambodia, and Siam, as Thailand was then known, attempted to define the border. One French-produced map placed the temple firmly on Cambodian soil, but Thai authorities have long claimed that the map was inaccurate, arguing that the watershed line, the natural divide of mountain, places the temple in Thailand. This disagreement simmered for decades, occasionally flaring up but never truly resolved. In 1962, the matter reached the International Court of Justice in The Hague. After examining the evidence, the court ruled in favor of Cambodia, stating that Thailand was obligated to withdraw its forces and allow Cambodian control of the temple. While Cambodia celebrated the decision as a restoration of its heritage, Thailand accepted the ruling reluctantly. The decision addressed only the temple itself, not the surrounding land, leaving a patch of roughly 4.6 square kilometers undefined. That small but strategically important area would become the focal point for future confrontations. For years, both sides managed an uneasy coexistence. Tourists visited the temple from both directions, soldiers patrolled without incident, and the dispute faded into the background of regional politics. But the stability was fragile, dependent on mutual restraint and the absence of nationalist fervor. When that restraint slipped, the consequences were immediate. Tensions began to rise again in 2008, when UNESCO designated Preah Vihear as a World Heritage Site under Cambodian administration. While Cambodia celebrated the international recognition, many in Thailand saw it as a direct challenge to their territorial claims. Nationalist groups in Bangkok organized protests, accusing the Thai government of failing to defend the country's sovereignty. Politicians, sensing an opportunity to rally support, began using the temple dispute as a tool to inflame patriotic sentiment. That year, both armies began reinforcing their positions near the temple. What had once been lightly guarded outposts became fortified camps. Soldiers on both sides were now within shouting distance of each other, separated only by disputed ground and a thin line of flags and barbed wire. In this tense environment, even the smallest incident, a soldier crossing an unmarked path, a farmer wandering into the wrong field, had the potential to spark violence. In the years that followed, clashes erupted sporadically. Artillery duels in 2011 left soldiers and civilians dead on both sides, and villages near the border were evacuated. For the people living in these communities, the temple dispute was not an abstract geopolitical question, it was a matter of survival. Farmers lost access to their land, children missed school, and families were forced to flee with little more than what they could carry. Each flare-up deepened mistrust and made reconciliation more difficult. The dispute is not only about history and pride, but also about strategic value. The temple's cliffside location offers a commanding view of the surrounding terrain, making it militarily significant. Control over the disputed area could provide an advantage in surveillance and defense, and in a region where borders are porous and military balance matters, that advantage is not easily surrendered. Both armies know this, and both have trained their soldiers to hold the line at any cost. In recent months, the situation has worsened. Satellite images and local reports show that Thailand has moved armored vehicles, artillery, and troop reinforcements closer to the contested zone. Cambodia has responded in kind, fortifying positions and conducting military drills near the frontier. Official statements from both governments accuse the other of provocations, from unauthorized patrols to construction of outposts in disputed areas. Neither side seems willing to step back, fearing that any concession will be seen as weakness. This is the dangerous reality of the Thailand-Cambodia border dispute. It is fueled by history, but sustained by politics and the logic of military deterrence. National pride makes compromise difficult, while the proximity of armed forces makes accidents more likely. One wrong move, a soldier misinterpreting a gesture, a misfired weapon, a patrol venturing too far, could transform a tense standoff into open conflict. And given the nationalist pressure in both capitals, any such incident would be hard to contain. For now, the border remains quiet but tense, a fragile calm maintained by the discipline of soldiers and the cautious language of diplomats. Yet the deeper issues remain unresolved, and each new troop movement, each angry speech, each diplomatic snub adds more weight to the fragile balance. If the dispute is not addressed through sustained negotiation, the question is not whether there will be another clash, but when. The acting Prime Minister of Thailand's recent statement has sent shockwaves through both domestic and international audiences. Standing before reporters in Bangkok, he issued a blunt warning. The ongoing standoff with Cambodia over the contested border could escalate into a full-scale war. His words were not couched in diplomatic language or softened by cautious phrasing. They were a direct acknowledgement of the severity of the situation. For many Thais, it was the first time in years that a leader had openly framed the dispute in such stark, potentially catastrophic terms. This warning did not emerge in a vacuum. Thailand is currently navigating a period of political turbulence at home. The Prime Minister, serving in an acting capacity, is operating with limited authority in a climate where opposition parties are vocal, the public is polarized, and questions about the stability of the government dominate headlines. Against this backdrop, the border crisis offers both a threat and an opportunity. On one hand, any escalation could destabilize the country further. On the other, a strong stance could rally nationalist sentiment and unite a divided population under a common cause. The political calculus is delicate, but the rhetoric has already shifted toward firmness and defiance. In his statement, the acting Prime Minister accused Cambodia of provocative military maneuvers along the disputed stretch of the border. He alleged that Cambodian troops had constructed unauthorized outposts within the contested zone and had refused to halt patrols despite repeated warnings. His language suggested a growing impatience with diplomatic talks that have failed to produce concrete results. He emphasized that Thailand would not tolerate any infringement on its sovereignty, framing the issue not just as a border dispute, but as a matter of national dignity. For Cambodians, these remarks were incendiary. Phnom Penh's leadership swiftly rejected the accusations, accusing Thailand of distorting the facts and engaging in its own aggressive maneuvers. Cambodian state media portrayed the Thai Prime Minister's words as an attempt to shift blame and distract from internal political struggles. The result was a rapid hardening of positions on both sides, with neither government willing to appear weak in the eyes of its citizens. The acting Prime Minister's decision to speak so forcefully was also a calculated message to the military. In Thailand, The armed forces hold significant political influence, and their support is essential for any leader navigating a period of instability. By publicly warning of the possibility of war, the Prime Minister signaled to military leaders that he is prepared to authorize decisive action if necessary. This serves as both reassurance and a challenge, reassurance that their readiness will not go to waste, and a challenge to be prepared for any scenario, however dangerous. International observers took notice as well. ASEAN, the regional bloc to which both Thailand and Cambodia belong, has long promoted the principle of resolving disputes through dialogue. A public acknowledgement of potential war between two member states undermines that principle and raises urgent questions about ASEAN's ability to mediate. Diplomats from neighboring countries, including Vietnam, Laos, and Malaysia, quietly expressed concern that the situation could spiral out of control before mediation efforts could even take root. For the Thai public, the Prime Minister's words have had a dual effect. Some citizens have rallied behind him, interpreting his statement as a necessary show of strength in the face of external provocation. In the markets of Bangkok, conversations about the border have become more animated, with some openly calling for a tougher military stance. In the rural northeast, closer to the border, his words carry a different weight, one of anxiety. Villagers in these areas are keenly aware that any escalation would put them directly in the line of fire, as it has in past clashes. They remember the artillery shells of 2011, the evacuations, the hurried departures from their homes. For them, talk of war is not political theater, it is a possible future they dread. The timing of the Prime Minister's warning has also raised questions about its intent. With elections looming and his political future uncertain, some analysts speculate that he is leveraging the border crisis to bolster his image as a decisive leader. By framing the conflict as a looming threat to national security, he may be seeking to shift public focus away from domestic political troubles and toward an external challenge that demands unity. In the high-stakes game of Southeast Asian politics, this kind of maneuvering is not unusual, but it is dangerous when the stakes include potential armed conflict. The Cambodian government, meanwhile, has responded with its own show of resolve. Military exercises have been conducted near the border, speeches from senior officials have denounced Thai aggression, and state media has framed the dispute as an existential defense of Cambodian sovereignty. In such an atmosphere, the acting Thai Prime Minister's warning is unlikely to be interpreted as a deterrent. Instead, it risks being seen as a provocation, reinforcing the very cycle of mistrust and escalation that both sides claim to want to avoid. The risk here is not only in the rhetoric, but in how it translates into actions on the ground. Thai and Cambodian soldiers are already stationed within sight of each other in disputed areas, their weapons ready, their orders clear. In such conditions, words from the top filter down quickly to the rank-hand file, shaping how they interpret the intentions of the other side. A commander hearing the Prime Minister's statement might instruct his troops to adopt a more aggressive posture. A Cambodian soldier, aware of those orders, might respond with equal hostility. In this way, speeches made hundreds of kilometers away can set in motion small but potentially deadly changes in behavior on the front lines. For outside powers with interests in the region, the warning is a signal to pay closer attention. China has strong economic ties to Cambodia and growing influence in Thailand, while the United States maintains security relationships with Bangkok. If the conflict were to escalate, both could find themselves drawn into delicate diplomatic balancing acts, trying to protect their interests without being seen as taking sides. This international dimension only adds complexity to an already volatile situation. The acting Prime Minister's statement, then, is more than a passing remark in a press conference. It is a deliberate act of political signaling aimed at multiple audiences: his domestic supporters, the military establishment, the Cambodian government, and the wider international community. It raises the stakes of the border dispute, making it harder for either side to de-escalate without appearing to lose face. Whether this was a calculated gamble or a moment of unguarded candor, the effect is the same. The conflict now feels more immediate, more dangerous, and more likely to tip from tense standoff into open hostilities. In the coming weeks, the true impact of the warning will become clear. If both sides temper their actions and return to dialogue, it may be remembered as a wake-up call that pushed diplomacy forward. But if tempers flare and incidents multiply, historians may look back on this moment as one of the turning points, the point where words helped set a course toward a conflict that neither side could control. In the weeks following the acting Thai Prime Minister's warning, the border between Thailand and Cambodia has transformed into a heavily militarized zone. Where once there were stretches of quiet farmland and small villages, there are now sandbag fortifications, camouflaged artillery positions, and columns of soldiers moving under the cover of tree lines. The military buildup on both sides is not a subtle affair. It is deliberate, visible, and designed to send a message: we are ready and we will not back down. Thailand's initial moves involved reinforcing existing outposts along the disputed 4.6 square kilometer area surrounding the Preah Vihear temple. Infantry units were rotated in from other provinces, some drawn from elite formations trained in rapid deployment. Alongside them came armored personnel carriers and light tanks, their tracks churning the dusty trails that wind toward the border. Artillery batteries, including 155 mm howitzers with ranges extending deep into Cambodian territory, were positioned in concealed emplacements just far enough from the frontier to comply with international norms, but close enough to respond within minutes to any perceived aggression. These deployments were accompanied by the arrival of logistical support, mobile kitchens, field hospitals, and fuel trucks to sustain a prolonged presence. Engineers constructed defensive berms and reinforced bunkers, while communication units established secure lines back to Bangkok. The message was unmistakable. Thailand was preparing not just for a skirmish, but for the possibility of sustained conflict. Cambodia's response was swift and equally assertive. From its side of the border, convoys of trucks brought in reinforcements from the Royal Cambodian Armed Forces. Soldiers in green fatigues dug fresh trenches overlooking disputed ground, their positions marked by the red and blue Cambodian flag fluttering above. Mortar teams were deployed, and older Soviet-era artillery pieces, refurbished and repainted, were rolled into firing positions. Some of these weapons, though decades old, remain deadly accurate in experienced hands. Cambodia's military also brought in units from its Special Forces Command, troops accustomed to operating in rugged terrain and trained for close quarters combat should the dispute spill into direct engagement. In several locations, soldiers on both sides now stand within a few hundred meters of each other. Through binoculars, they can see their counterparts moving between sandbags and tree cover. At night, the glow of campfires and the hum of generators mark their presence. The proximity is dangerous. One wrong move, one misinterpreted action, could turn tense stares into exchanged fire. The buildup has extended beyond the immediate border. Thai military bases in nearby provinces have increased readiness levels, with helicopters on standby for troop transport and reconnaissance missions. In Cambodia, units stationed farther inland have been put on alert, and reserve forces have been quietly mobilized. Military supply depots are seeing increased activity, with ammunition and fuel being stockpiled in forward locations. Both countries are also engaging in public displays of strength. Thailand has conducted live fire exercises just outside the disputed zone, with footage broadcast on national television showing tanks firing, soldiers advancing under simulated artillery barrages, and helicopters swooping low over the terrain. Cambodia has responded in kind. inviting journalists to witness training drills where troops practiced storming mock enemy positions and repelling armored assaults. These displays serve a dual purpose: to reassure domestic audiences that their armies are ready, and to signal to the other side that any aggression will be met with force. In military terms, this is a textbook example of deterrence. By building up forces and making their readiness visible, each side hopes to dissuade the other from taking provocative action. But deterrence is a double-edged sword. The very presence of large numbers of heavily armed troops in close proximity increases the risk of accidental escalation. Soldiers under stress, facing an enemy just across the line, are more likely to react quickly, and sometimes rashly, to perceived threats. There is also the matter of terrain. The disputed border area is rugged, with dense forest in some sections and steep inclines in others. Visibility is often limited, and in the thick foliage, it is easy for patrols to lose track of boundaries. A Cambodian patrol moving along what it believes to be its side of the border might inadvertently cross into territory claimed by Thailand, prompting a confrontation. Likewise, Thai reconnaissance teams probing for signs of enemy movement could find themselves suddenly face to face with armed Cambodian troops. In such an environment, the difference between a tense standoff and a deadly firefight could be measured in seconds. Beyond the soldiers and their equipment, the military buildup has profound effects on local communities. Villages that once depended on cross-border trade have seen markets close, roads blocked, and fields abandoned. Farmers who work land near the frontier now risk encountering military patrols or stumbling into live fire exercises. Some families have begun moving deeper into their respective countries, seeking safety away from the contested zone. Schools in border districts have prepared evacuation plans, recalling the shelling and displacement that occurred during earlier clashes. Internationally, satellite imagery of the region has revealed the scale of the buildup, attracting the attention of foreign governments and think tanks specializing in conflict monitoring. Analysts note that the level of military preparation on both sides is far greater than in past disputes, suggesting that each government is preparing for the possibility that this standoff could last weeks or months rather than days. This kind of sustained buildup is costly, both financially and politically. Maintaining large forces in forward positions requires continuous resupply, placing strain on national budgets. It also keeps tensions high, making it harder for political leaders to step back without appearing to have wasted resources or lost resolve. The longer the troops remain face to face, the more normal the state of near war becomes, and the more likely it is that one side will eventually decide to act rather than wait. The danger now is that this cycle of reinforcement and counter-reinforcement is becoming self-sustaining. Each new deployment by one side prompts a matching move by the other. Each training exercise is mirrored with a show of force across the border. The original purpose, to prevent war through deterrence, risks being undermined by the very actions intended to achieve it. For Thailand and Cambodia, the military buildup has become both a shield and a trap. It demonstrates strength, satisfies domestic demands for security, and sends a clear message of resolve. But it also locks both countries into a posture that leaves little room for compromise. With so much force already in place, the temptation to use it, or the risk of it being used unintentionally, grows with each passing day. In conflicts where opposing forces stand so close together, the greatest danger is not always a deliberate act of aggression, it is a mistake. In the tense borderlands between Thailand and Cambodia, the risk of miscalculation looms over every patrol, every radio transmission, and every nervous glance through a rifle scope. When heavily armed soldiers are operating within sight of one another, often just a few hundred meters apart, the margin for error shrinks to almost nothing. A single misunderstood movement or an accidental gunshot could ignite a chain reaction that neither side can control. The geography of the disputed area magnifies this danger. Dense forests obscure vision, making it difficult for soldiers to maintain awareness of their surroundings. Steep ridges and winding trails mean that patrols can easily lose their bearings, sometimes crossing an invisible border without realizing it. In peacetime, such an error might be resolved with a shouted warning and a retreat. But in the current climate, with nationalist rhetoric at fever pitch and military buildups on both sides, even a minor incursion could be seen as a deliberate provocation. The soldiers stationed here operate under intense pressure. Control. This pressure can lead to heightened vigilance, but it can also lead to overreaction. A shadow moving in the trees could be an animal, or it could be an enemy scout. A loud crack in the distance could be a branch snapping, or it could be the opening shot of an ambush. In such an environment, the safest decision, from the soldier's perspective, is often to respond with force first and ask questions later. History offers sobering examples of how small incidents in this region have escalated into larger confrontations. In 2011, an exchange of gunfire near the Preah Vihear temple began with what appeared to be a misunderstanding about troop movements. Within hours, artillery was being fired, villages were being evacuated, and both governments were issuing urgent statements condemning the other side. The underlying disputes had been simmering for decades, but the trigger was an immediate and localized misunderstanding. Today, the conditions for such an incident are even more volatile. Both armies have deployed heavy weapons, and both have issued rules of engagement that allow for rapid response to perceived threats. In practice, this means that if one side believes it is under attack, it has both the means and the authorization to strike back instantly, even if the attack turns out to have been a misinterpreted signal or an accidental movement across the line. The risk is compounded by the role of communication in such high-stakes environments. Radio messages can be garbled, misunderstood, or delayed, especially in rugged terrain where signals are weak. A commander who believes his unit is under fire might order a retaliatory strike without waiting for confirmation, especially if he fears that hesitation could result in casualties. Once the shooting starts, it can spread rapidly, pulling in units from neighboring sectors who rush to support their comrades. Adding to the danger is the political context in which these soldiers operate. Leaders in both Bangkok and Phnom Penh are under pressure to project strength, and neither side wants to appear weak. This creates an atmosphere in which backing down, even in the face of a misunderstanding, can be politically costly. A commander who allows enemy troops to retreat without punishment might be accused of failing to defend the nation. A government that accepts an explanation for an incident without retaliation might face domestic criticism for being too soft. The border communities, caught in the middle, understand this danger all too well. In villages near the disputed zone, people live with the knowledge that their homes could be caught in crossfire at any moment. They recall how, during previous clashes, artillery shells landed far from the immediate battlefield, destroying houses and forcing families to flee with little warning. For them, the risk of miscalculation is not an abstract concept. It is a matter of life and death that could unfold in seconds. International actors watching the situation are equally concerned. ASEAN has long promoted the idea that disputes between member states should be resolved peacefully, but in cases like this, diplomacy can be overtaken by events on the ground. If a miscalculation triggers a firefight, the space for negotiation shrinks rapidly, replaced by demands for retaliation and military escalation. Once casualties occur, public opinion hardens, and the political cost of de-escalating increases dramatically. Military analysts point out that one of the most dangerous scenarios is a spiral of assumption. This occurs when one side interprets the other's defensive preparations as offensive intent, prompting them to increase their own readiness, which in turn is seen as an aggressive move. In the current standoff, such a spiral could begin with something as simple as a change in patrol patterns, the construction of a new observation post, or the sudden movement of artillery units. Each step taken in the name of security can be read by the other side as preparation for attack. The risk of miscalculation is also heightened by the involvement of multiple command levels. Decisions made by soldiers or junior officers in the heat of the moment can have strategic consequences far beyond their original scope. A single sniper shot, an unauthorized patrol, or a poorly timed training exercise could ignite a confrontation that national leaders then feel compelled to escalate. Efforts to reduce this risk have been made in the past. Communication hotlines between military commands, joint border committees, and ASEAN monitoring missions have all been used to prevent misunderstandings. However, these mechanisms rely on trust and a willingness to use them in good faith. In the current climate, where each side accuses the other of acting in bad faith, even these safeguards may not function effectively. The tragedy of miscalculation is that it often produces outcomes no one truly wanted. Neither Thailand nor Cambodia may be seeking a full-scale war, but both are prepared for it, and both are determined not to lose face. This creates a paradox. The better prepared they are for war, the more likely it becomes that an unintended incident could lead to one. The soldiers at the front lines are the first to face this reality, but the consequences would be felt far beyond the border, in the capitals, in the villages, and across the region. At this stage, the most effective way to reduce the risk of miscalculation is to create physical and procedural distance between opposing forces. This could mean pulling heavy weapons back from the immediate border, increasing the use of unarmed observers, or scheduling regular face-to-face meetings between local commanders. But such measures require political will, and in an atmosphere where both sides see compromise as weakness, the incentives for taking these steps are weak. Every day that passes with troops face-to-face, weapons loaded, and tensions high is another day when the wrong sound, the wrong movement, or the wrong assumption could set off a chain of events that neither side can stop. In such an environment, the real question is not whether a miscalculation could happen, but how long both sides can avoid one. The potential for a Thailand-Cambodia war does not stop at the frontier. Its consequences would ripple far beyond the disputed 4.6 square kilometers of land near the Preah Vihear temple, touching entire communities, destabilizing Southeast Asia, and altering regional politics. At the heart of this impact are the civilians who live along the border, ordinary people whose lives are shaped not by international court rulings or military strategy, but by the rhythms of farming, trade, and family. For them, the looming conflict is not a distant headline, it is a shadow that hangs over every day. Border villages on both sides are some of the poorest in their respective countries, yet they are rich in cross-border ties. Families often have relatives living just a few kilometers away on the other side. Markets are shared spaces where Cambodian farmers bring produce to sell in Thai towns, and Thai traders cross into Cambodia for goods that are cheaper or more abundant. A war would sever these economic lifelines instantly. The first sign of trouble would likely be the closure of border crossings, cutting off not only trade but also access to health care and education for those who depend on services across the line. The fear of renewed shelling is ever present for those who remember the clashes of 2008-2011. In those years, artillery fire damaged homes, schools, and temples. Entire villages were evacuated at short notice, with families carrying what they could in plastic bags and bundles of cloth. Some took refuge in hastily erected camps where conditions were harsh, limited clean water, makeshift toilets, and tents that barely kept out the monsoon rains. A new war would bring the same chaos, only more intense given the heavier military presence on both sides today. Children would be among the most affected. In times of conflict, schools near the border often close indefinitely. Teachers flee to safer areas and lessons stop. For many children, this means not only a halt in education, but also the loss of a safe, structured environment. In the camps of the last conflict, aid workers recalled children becoming withdrawn, anxious, and fearful at the sound of loud noises. The psychological toll lingers long after the fighting stops. The economic cost to both countries would be significant. Border trade, tourism, and agriculture would suffer almost immediately. Preah Vihear, despite its disputed status, has been a source of tourism revenue for Cambodia, attracting visitors to its dramatic cliff-top location. Fighting in the area would end tourism entirely and could damage the temple itself, a blow not only to Cambodia's economy but also to its cultural heritage. Thailand's northeastern provinces, which rely on cross-border commerce, would also feel the impact. Farmers might find themselves unable to sell crops or buy affordable supplies, and local businesses would see their customer base shrink overnight. Regionally, the outbreak of war between Thailand and Cambodia would be a severe blow to ASEAN's credibility. The association has long championed the idea of ASEAN centrality, the notion that Southeast Asian nations can solve their disputes peacefully without outside interference. If two member states resort to armed conflict, it would undermine this principle and raise questions about ASEAN's ability to manage tensions among its own members. Other unresolved disputes in the region, such as those in the South China Sea, could become more volatile if countries conclude that ASEAN mediation is ineffective. The conflict could also draw in outside powers with strategic interests in Southeast Asia. Cambodia is one of China's closest partners in the region, benefiting from Chinese investment and political backing. Thailand, while maintaining ties with China, also has a security relationship with the United States, which sees Bangkok as a long-standing treaty ally. If the conflict escalates, both Beijing and Washington could be tempted to offer military or diplomatic support to their respective partners, potentially turning a local dispute into a geopolitical contest. Even if neither side seeks such involvement, the perception of external alignment could harden positions and complicate efforts to negotiate peace. Humanitarian organizations are already quietly preparing for the possibility of renewed fighting. In past conflicts, the Red Cross and UN agencies provided emergency food, shelter, and medical care to displaced families. This time, they face the added challenge of operating in a post-pandemic environment where resources are stretched thin and donor fatigue is real. The scale of displacement could be larger, given the increased troop numbers and weaponry in place. Camps might have to accommodate tens of thousands of people, many of them arriving with injuries or trauma from the fighting. Environmental damage is another likely consequence. The border region includes forest reserves and wildlife habitats that could be harmed by shelling, troop movements, and the construction of military infrastructure. Landmines, a legacy of past conflicts in Cambodia, could once again become a threat if new areas are mined to prevent troop advances. These dangers would persist long after the fighting stops, making farming and resettlement risky for years to come. In the capitals of both countries, the civilian impact would also be political. Images of destroyed homes, injured children, and fleeing families would flood television screens and social media. Public anger could pressure governments to either escalate the conflict further or, conversely, seek a swift resolution to avoid further suffering. In an era where information moves instantly, managing the narrative of the war would be almost as challenging as fighting it. For ordinary people, however, the politics matter less than the immediate realities, the loss of livelihoods, the fear for their children's safety, the uncertainty of when they might return home. In interviews conducted after the last major clashes, villagers on both sides expressed similar sentiments. They did not care who controlled the disputed land as long as they could live in peace. Yet their voices are often drowned out by nationalist rhetoric from politicians and media outlets, turning their lives into bargaining chips in a struggle for political advantage. The regional economy would also feel the shockwaves. Thailand is a major exporter in Southeast Asia, and instability along its border could disrupt transport routes to Cambodia and beyond. Conversely, Cambodia's growing manufacturing sector relies on imported materials from Thailand. Even a short war could cause delays, shortages, and price increases in both countries, rippling outward to affect regional supply chains. The most sobering reality is that the impact of war often outlasts the war itself. In the aftermath of previous border clashes, rebuilding homes and infrastructure took years. Psychological recovery was slower still. Farmers who lost land or livestock sometimes never fully recovered their livelihoods. Young people whose schooling was interrupted found it difficult to catch up, with long-term effects on their employment prospects. A new conflict would compound these losses, creating another generation scarred by the same cycle of violence and displacement. This is why, for many observers, the most important battle is not the one that might be fought over the disputed border, but the one to prevent it from happening at all. The cost in human suffering, in regional stability, and in economic opportunity would be far greater than any territorial gain. Yet in the heat of nationalist fervor and political maneuvering, such calculations often get pushed aside. For the people who live in the shadow of the Thailand-Cambodia border, the hope is simple, that leaders on both sides will remember that the price of war is not measured in maps or monuments, but in the lives of those who must live with its consequences. Whether that hope will be enough to avert disaster remains uncertain, but as troops continue to face each other across the disputed ground, the stakes could not be higher.